Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets whom your fathers killed. So you are witnesses, and you consent to the deeds of your fathers, for they killed them, and you build their tombs. Therefore also the wisdom of God said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill and persecute, so that the blood of all the prophets shed from the foundation of the world may be charged against this generation, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, it will be required of this generation. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who were entering. As he went away from there, the scribes and the Pharisees began to press him hard and to provoke him to speak about many things, lying in wait for him to catch him in something he might say.
What version do you have Bible, Steve?
ESV. So what words were of note there? I'm sorry? Generation. Yep, that's an important one.
Greed and wickedness.
I'm sorry, what? Again?
Again. Oh, greed and wickedness.
Yeah.
Inside and outside. Blood.
Okay, yeah, that's good. We're certainly going to be hitting a lot of those here. Okay, so after, as we ended up last time, Jesus was talking about the light that was in them and hiding a light and being a light. So he's still speaking about a light that is not hidden, which is himself, and those that cannot see, which would be the Pharisees and the lawyers that are gathered there. He taught them that the problem was not one of light, but one of sight. In verse 36, just before we began this week, Jesus is not condemning them, but rather he's offering hope to the crowd, if only they would respond to the light. So he continues to extend a gospel invitation to the crowd that has slandered him. So as Jesus is giving this teaching, a Pharisee invites him to dine with him. This is probably a midday meal, a brunch or a lunch type meal that Jesus is invited to in the home of this Pharisee. So Jesus goes into the house and immediately reclines at the table, ready for the meal. But he doesn't stop to perform the ceremonial washing. In verse 38, it says that the Pharisee is astonished by this because this was something that was expected, and it was a shock that Jesus would not complete that ceremonial washing before he would sit down at the table or lay down at the table to eat. When the Pharisees see Jesus break traditions, they feel that he's breaking the law and he's deserving of punishment. Now, this is only a ceremonial washing, so it's not like he's, not washing up for dinner in the way we think of it, right? Because this is something different, and we'll see that in a minute. It's strictly ceremonial, and it didn't use any kind of soap or any disinfectant like that. It was just pouring a little bit of water over there. So as we often see with some of their emphasis, it began in a good place. This ritual hand washing does have some origins in the law of Moses, and somebody has Exodus 30, 17 to 21. We'll read about that. This is where this idea of hand washing begins.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Make a bronze basin and its bronze stand for washing. Place it between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water in it. Aaron and his sons are to wash their hands and feet with the water from it. Whenever they enter the tent of meeting, they shall wash with water, so that they will not die. Also, when they approach the altar to minister by presenting an offering made to the Lord by fire, they shall wash their hands and feet, so that they will not die. This is to be the lasting ordinance for Aaron and his descendants for the generations to come.
So originally, this instruction for washing was given to the priests. As they went into the temple to perform service, they were to do this washing. Well, over time, the Pharisees and some of the other priests, they began to teach that the table in your home is just like the altar in the temple. And the sacrifices or the offerings brought into the temple are just like the bread that you eat in your home. So if that's the case, well, then obviously, before you take the bread in your home, you should do the ceremonial washing. And so they took this instruction in the law that was given to the priests, and they just kind of extended it out and applied it to everybody in their home before they ate. So that was kind of the beginning of this, this association with the priests and their washing in preparation. The leaders thought, well, if you didn't wash ceremonially before you ate, then you were unholy, and it was a sign of moral impurity to not wash your hands. Now, I found a picture here. This is more of a modern day type cup, and this would be used to do the ceremonial washing. And you'll notice there are two handles on that. The idea, if we get the video here in a minute, we'll see this, but the idea is they would fill the cup with water, and they would take the cup with one hand and pour it over the hand, either 2 or 3 times. The tradition varied a little bit. And then they would set the cup down. Well, now you can't go and grab the cup with your clean hand, right? That's where there are 2 handles. So now you can grab the other handle that you didn't touch before and pick it up in 2 or 3 washes over the other hand, okay? So we'll see this demonstrated. Can we run that video? No.
I can't, I haven't got the email.
Oh, okay. Okay, I think I can run it. We won't have the sound with it, but I think you can.
You can narrate it, you know.
Maybe I can. Here, let's see.
But subtitles. Oh, yeah. Subtitles.
Oh. Yeah, I'm not getting subtitles. Well, anyway, he's just talking about, he's giving an introduction to the washing, and in a second, somebody's going to demonstrate it here. Okay, here we go. So here's the cup, and you'll see that the gentleman picks up the cup, and I think they would say that you would start with your non-dominant hand, right? So you had to, there was even a procedure around that. So he fills the cup up with water, and then he puts it over his hand a couple times. In this case, he grabbed the towel, and he's doing it, I guess, twice. And then there's a prayer that he says. We'll talk about this prayer in a minute. So he says the prayer. And what happened? Did I freeze here? Okay, I guess that's it. So there are a couple of variations on this. Sometimes they would apply the towel on the cup, sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they take the towel and kind of raise their hands, because some of the language here refers to raising your hand, and so that's part of the prayer that he would give. And then they would dry their hands with a towel, and then they wouldn't say anything. They were not allowed to say anything until they went to the table and they prayed for the bread. So it was important there that they did that. So again, they've been doing this for over 2,000 years, so there are some variations that have taken place in the meantime. So after he washes his hands, he says this prayer, and I won't try to say all these words because I'll butcher it, but the Netilat Yadayim, or the lifting of hands, or on the taking of hands. So that's why often they would raise their hands. Now, sometimes back in Jesus' time, they wouldn't use a cup like that, but they would use very little water. So they would use 1.5 eggshells of water. So just dipping a little bit of water over their hand, obviously not to clean them, but just to perform this ceremonial function. And so the prayer that was said as he was drying his hands was, the English translation of it is this: "Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us regarding hand washing." So that was the prayer they would say. So when you read that prayer, what do you notice about that prayer? Anything jump out at you there?
Sanctified with commandments.
Yeah.
And commanded. Sanctified us.
Yeah.
Your commandments.
Yeah, so that, again, they see these outward acts they're doing as the means of sanctification. Yeah. Okay, so that's what the hand washing looked like. So the Pharisee now is trying to think about how he's going to respond to Jesus, because Jesus didn't wash his hands. He just went and got ready to eat. And it's not clear whether the Pharisee actually said something or whether Jesus knows his thoughts. But in any event, Jesus knows what he's thinking and responds to him. So Jesus points out that they're very concerned about cleaning the outside of the cup and the dish. And then he goes on and says, "But you yourselves internally, you're full of greed and wickedness." So he points out the hypocrisy that they were not seeing. And as we saw last week, they have a sight problem, not a light problem. So then Jesus escalates the confrontation by calling them fools. The inside and outside were made by the same maker, Jesus says. And they're fools because they think that their external actions are going to please God and gain his favor, or as in the case of the prayer, earn their sanctification. Jesus then tells them to give alms of the things within, and everything is clean to you. Now here's another example where Jesus isn't contradicting the law, but he's coming to fulfill the law rather than abolish it. His statement has its origins back in Deuteronomy, and somebody has Deuteronomy 26, 12 through 15. Did I give that to somebody? Yeah, okay.
"When you have been paying all the tithe of your produce in the 3rd year, which is the year of tithing, give it to the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat within your towns and be filled. Then you shall say before the Lord your God, I have removed the sacred portion out of my house, and moreover I have given it to the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all your commandment that you have commanded me. I have not transgressed any of your commandments, nor have I forgotten them. I have not eaten of the tithe while I was mourning, or removed any of it while I was unclean, or offered any of it to the dead. I have obeyed the voice of the Lord my God. I have done according to all that you have commanded me. Look down from your holy habitation, from heaven, and bless your people Israel and the ground that you have given us, as you swore to your fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey."
So in verse 41, where Jesus talks about giving the alms from within, and behold, they will be clean, it's pointing back to these verses in Deuteronomy. We don't pick that up right away, but remember, he's talking to guys who are Pharisees and lawyers and scribes who know the law inside and out. So they got the message there. God telling the people then to fulfill their commitments that they've made, and to give out of their heart and not just be washing the outside. Well, before we jump into the woes that begin in verse 42, I want to do a little bit of background on some of the rules and the legalities that the Jewish leaders created. We know that they imposed these rules on the people, but let's kind of get an idea of the kind of burden that they were dealing with here. So there were some oral traditions around the Torah and some teachings about more details about the Torah, which is, of course, the first 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of our Bible. And they were compiled into what was called the Mishnah. So by the time of Jesus, all these teachings from the priests and the rabbis had been gathered together. They hadn't been written down yet. That probably happened sometime after Jesus, but at least they were compiled and they were known, even though not in written form yet. There is an English translation of the Mishnah, and it runs almost 900 pages. Okay, so to give you an idea of what we're talking about, it's that big. And it was the first major work of rabbinic literature that we see. So within the Mishnah, there are 6 orders or 6 sections, or what are called 6 seders. The seder, we are familiar with the idea of a seder dinner, but the seder means an order or a ceremony being conducted. And here they are. I won't try to pronounce all of them, but you can see them there. There's one that deals with agriculture and the order of seeds. There's another section of the Mishnah that talks about holidays. Another one that deals with family law, treating women and treating children in the family. There's another section that deals with damages when an individual is wronged. Another section dealing with sacrifices, and another with purity. And of course, they did this, they wrote these additional rules because they felt that there were some points where the Torah, the law given to Moses, was unclear. So they're going to go and make it more detailed so that there's no questions about it. Because, I mean, it makes sense, right? If you're getting your sanctification and your salvation from following those laws, well, you better follow them right. So let's get all the details in there. Well, to take this a step further, within this first one here, the Seder Zeraim that deals with agriculture, there is a section in there, the Masorot, that deals with tithes. So it's an essay or a treatise on tithes, and it deals with the agricultural tithes that were to be given to the priests and the Levites, and then how much is left over and what you're allowed to consume after what your tithe is. Well, then, within that Masorah, there are 5 chapters devoted to the conditions that make produce subject to tithing. So what type of crop is it? At what point can the crop be consumed without tithing? But even for all of that detail, that still wasn't the final word, because the Jewish leaders would still have debates among themselves about the conditions, and they would even argue about what garden herbs were subject to tithing and what were not subject to tithing. So you begin to get a feel here for just the weight and the burden that this is. All of these rules and regulations, they just become oppressive on the people. You know, how can you keep all of them? And especially when it's not settled, right? They still have debates about some of these things going on. But really, it kind of had to be this way if you're going to rely on the law, on these rules for your sanctification. It had to be made clear, and so that's what they did. They went out and put all the details in there. They thought that strict adherence was going to please God. So when we read the law of Moses, it should make us cry out, we cannot keep all of these. We need a Savior. But of course, rather than doing that, they just piled more laws and more laws on there. So as we go through some of these woes, and we talk about what some of these men are doing, there's a little bit of background to understand a little bit more about why these rules were so oppressive and so specific. So then Jesus goes into this section where he lists these 6 woes. A woe here would be considered a grief or a sorrow. It's also a warning of coming judgment for the behavior that he's condemning. Later on in Jesus' life, we see him giving out 7 woes. And the 7 woes are recorded in Matthew, and they actually take place after Palm Sunday, after the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, probably Tuesday of that week, is when Jesus confronts the Pharisees with 7 woes. And there's some overlap. There's some commonality between the 6 woes here and the 7 woes there, but there are a few differences as well. So Jesus follows up his statement about giving alms with this first woe. He warns them that their practice of tithing, about their practice of tithing. So by Jesus' day, the religious leaders had written a great deal about what conditions made crops liable to be tithed, some of what we saw in the Mishnah, even to the point of arguing about the herbs you grow in your garden and whether they were subject to tithe or not. And as it says here in verse 42, they were very meticulous about tithing mint, but they neglected justice and love. Jesus says they should have been concerned about the greater things, but they weren't. The Jews knew this because the prophets had told them this. We see this in Micah 6, 7, and 8. I think, did I give that to you, John?
Should we offer him thousands of rams and tens of thousands of rivers of olive oil? Would that please the Lord? Should we sacrifice our firstborn children, pay for the sins of our servants? Would that make him glad? No, O people. The Lord has already told you what is good. And this is what he requires: to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
The prophet of old had made clear to them what God really wanted. Now, Jesus isn't telling them to stop tithing. That's not the point of this. Rather, he's telling them that their lives are filled with empty, symbolic alms, prayers, fasting, but they're taking advantage of the people. They're substituting this attention to all this minute detail for what God really wants, which is merciful and humble hearts. So while we pick on these guys a lot and jump all over this, let's ask a question for ourselves. How can we be guilty of substituting outward ritual for hearts that are seeking God and are loving to others? Can we do the same thing sometimes?
Could you repeat what you just said?
Yeah, how can we be guilty of substituting ritual for hearts that seek God?
Or ignoring needs of people around us.
Yeah, being happy with outward signs and ignoring the needs of people. Yeah.
Going through the motions, and then there's people in need of love, gentleness, caring,
Yeah.
you know, to speak into their life, to go over to their house or something.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
just going through the motions, and we're not loving people as the body should, but that's the same thing.
It is the same thing, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Well, then Jesus continues. In verse 43, he gives them the second woe, which deals with their reputation. Here we see the Pharisees want the best seats. Synagogues had some different arrangements, but some of the synagogues at that time, up toward the front, they had a semicircle of seats that faced the congregation. Well, those were the box seats. They were the place to be. And so the Pharisees wanted to sit in those seats. They were seats of honor. People could see them as they came in, and they craved that honor. They felt they deserved it. It had become a part of who they were, a part of their identity. So they were concerned, again here, with their reputation and their outward appearance. They were seeking their own glory and not God's glory. And then Jesus talks about them getting greetings in the marketplace. They loved it when they would get a greeting in the marketplace, because often the greeting would come with some kind of a lofty title, or, a salute to them, calling them rabbi, or calling them the great one, or my Lord. So they loved to hear it, but not only did they love to hear it, they loved the fact that everybody else around them heard it too. All the rest of the crowd heard that people were giving them these accolades and praising them. So Jesus speaks this woe against their pride and the reputation of wanting to get all these accolades from people and get this praise from people. So a question for us. We don't have reserved seating in our church, although the front pews are better.
I'll spit in this
So while we don't have a preferred seating arrangement like that, what are some ways that maybe we seek to guard our reputation at church?
Boy, it's a lot of subtle ways. I find that Sunday morning is probably the most deceptive time of your week, where you gotta, people ask you, how you doing? And you don't say, I had a miserable week, and I sinned, and, got angry. It's okay, or, that sort of thing. It's a very subtle thing when we protect our reputation. It's in not maybe talking about hard things. It's in not seeming like I'm not doing just as well as everyone else is doing, which everyone's playing that game. Everyone's struggling, but somehow everyone thinks everyone else is doing better. So you just don't want to bring them down. So you just say things are good. You talk about the good things. You talk about something other than how things are really going in your heart.
Yeah.
You're also privileged if you're senior pastor of your
If Pastor Harry talks to you, that just means you're in trouble.
There's also situations where people have been hurt by saying something, and the people can be more hurt by it. So that's a reality too.
Yeah.
That's a very hurtful thing, and that is a real thing. That somebody bears their soul and
Someone uses it against you.
I'll pray for you, and it's false. Or I can read Bible verses, but just to turn around and give a person a Bible verse and turn away and walk around, that's fake. It's not that I believe the verses, but there's also a lot of that happens where sometimes you have to have the trust in people. Because people can be more hurt by that.
You feel like you can't be vulnerable because they're
Well, the thing is that it's a reality. As much as people, you say they try to hide it, well, that's a reality as well. So.
Well, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, because I'm supposed to have the joy of the Lord.
Yeah.
And some days my joy is like that much, and some days it's like that much. And so I try to be kind of consistent with joy, even though some days I'm not that joyous.
And we've kind of learned how to behave in a way, right? And so, as you were saying, it can be very subtle because we know how to put on the good face and to do what's acceptable. And so,
I've seen people embarrassed by something I've said. So the reality is that there's people there willing to listen, but there's others who aren't. So that's
Well, sometimes they don't want to hear like the real nitty gritty. They just want to hear the gloss.
So
The
then
gloss
you
over.
won't say it, you can't be. But there's certain people who choose to be, but
Right.
that's,
yeah.
and I think we should be very careful that we have arms of love and we can listen and care about people, because when somebody's already hurt, that's a double, if not triple whammy on somebody.
Yeah.
And I think that's hypocrisy in itself. I do.
Yeah.
Why do we come together if, people can't?
If it's not for encouragement, yeah.
I mean, so.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Well, Jesus continues on with his woes in verse 44. We saw as this thing began, the Jews have passed judgment on Jesus in their minds because they think he's ritually unclean because he didn't perform the hand washing. So now Jesus calls them unclean for their actions. And this whole thing about the unmarked graves might be a little bit confusing, but here again, it has its origins in the Mosaic Law. The Mosaic Law tells us that if anyone touched a dead body, they were ceremonially unclean for 7 days. And that's, Alan, I think that's you, Numbers 19:16.
Whoever in the open field touches someone who is killed with a sword or died naturally or touches a human bone or a grave shall be unclean 7 days.
Okay, so they were unclean for touching a dead body, but again, they're going to expand this. Well, if you touch a corpse, well, what about if you touch a grave? Well, that's got to be unclean too. So again, they're just kind of piling on to what's out there. Now, there were, if we remember, we read about they would whitewash the tombs sometimes. And the reason they would whitewash the tombs is so that they would stand out, so that nobody would accidentally touch a tomb and become unclean. Then they would be ceremonially unclean, even though it was accidental. So what Jesus is saying is, you Pharisees, you become just like the unmarked graves. So if there was a tomb that wasn't marked, then somebody could brush into it and become unclean. Jesus says, hey, you guys are the same way. You're just like unmarked graves, because people are walking over unmarked graves and they become unclean without knowing it. And this comparison is the Pharisees and their standards of uprightness and holiness that they brought to the nation by following all this minutiae and regulation becomes a stumbling block. And so they haven't dealt with their sin of pride that they're harboring in their hearts. So rather than lead the people in love and guide them, they've got all of these hidden rules and these secrets, and the people stumble across them without knowing it, just like stumbling across an unmarked grave. So with all of their legalism, the rules, they become a stumbling block to the people, and they end up entrapping the people just like an unmarked grave would. So that's what what Jesus is talking about there. The New Testament scholar Leon Morris put it this way: people who walked over unmarked graves became ceremonially unclean, and people who walked in the teaching and ways of the Pharisees became morally unclean. Morally unclean. That was the kind of hazard that they were bringing to the nation. So there's a lawyer in the crowd, and he's kind of heard enough, and he says, well, not only you talk to the Pharisees, now you're insulting us too. So I guess something's getting through to him. Now, the lawyers are not priests or scribes, but they are experts in the fine details of the rules and the regulations of the law. So they're well-versed in all of these things that we've been talking about. They're not like a lawyer that would practice law in a court the way we would think of a lawyer, but they're interpreters of the law. So Jesus directs his next woe in verses 45 and 46 at these lawyers. He said they place unbearable burdens on the people, and then they do nothing to follow the regulations themselves. So it's kind of a two-pronged attack here. And in verse 46, where it talks about the burden that they place on the people, that burden is related to the word for cargo on a ship. So it's an idea of something that's very weighty and very heavy, unbearable for the people. Going back to the Mishnah that we talked about earlier, there's one point in the Mishnah where it states that the teachings and the traditions of the scribes take precedence over God's word, okay? The scribes' teachings were more important than God's word. And the reasoning goes something like this. Actually, the Mishnah says, a more strict rule applies to the teachings of the scribes than to the teachings of the Torah. And their thought was this. They agreed that it was a serious matter to go against the law, but there are some places where the law was unclear. And it was the job of the lawyers and the scribes and the Pharisees to make the law clearer. So if it's bad to go against the law, which was unclear, it's even worse to go against this clarification that the lawyers had put out there. Okay, so that was their convoluted thought process about why it was more important to obey their writings than even the law. And of course, the irony was that, if anything, their teachings made the law less clear and incorrectly interpreted the intent of the law, which was to point them to a Savior. Now, not only did the Mishnah say that the teachings of the scribes carried more weight than the law, it also exempted the scribes from keeping some of their own rules. So the people bore the burden, and the leaders enjoyed the loopholes they could get out of it. Rather than helping and encouraging people, the lawyers have created burdens and obstacles for the people, and that's what Jesus is criticizing here. The fifth woe deals with the blood of the prophets. Here Jesus notes that these leaders honor the prophets by building them nice tombs. These are the same prophets whom their fathers killed. So they want to look good by building the tombs, but they're not condemning the acts of their fathers. In fact, they're ignoring them, or they oppose the teaching of the prophets in the same way that their fathers did. If they really wanted to honor the prophets of old, they would heed their words and follow their teachings. So Jesus says they are witnesses against themselves. And as with the other woes, these men outwardly look good, but inwardly they're corrupt. In verse 49, Jesus uses the phrase, the wisdom of God. He's not quoting a specific Old Testament passage here, but rather he's summarizing God's wisdom as seen throughout the Old Testament. God's response to the Jewish leaders killing the prophets was not immediate judgment and destruction, but God continued to send more prophets and apostles, and they were also killed. So even throughout their sin, even throughout their rejection, God keeps reaching out in mercy to his people. Well, Jesus then says that the blood of all the prophets shed from the foundation of the world will be upon this generation. This is similar language to what we've heard in the last few weeks, where there was this condemnation on the cities of Chorazin and Bethsaida. Remember, Jesus said it would be worse for them in the day of judgment than for Tyre and Sidon, because something greater was there than what was in Tyre and Sidon. Or it's like what we saw last week with Nineveh, that Nineveh will rise up in the judgment to condemn that current generation of Jesus' time. Nineveh repented at Jonah's preaching, and something greater than Nineveh was here. So this condemnation here is along those same lines. This current generation in Jesus' times, they have the blessing of all the teachings of the law and the prophets, and now they're also witness to the Son of God in their midst. But as we've seen through these last few passages over the last few weeks, they continue to reject their Messiah. So God charges them with the blood of all the martyred prophets. The first one being Abel in Genesis, and then Zechariah, mentioned here, is really the last martyr that we know of in the Old Testament before the silence begins at the end of the prophecy. So what a terrible price to pay for rejecting the Messiah, but certainly they have all the evidence and the presence of Messiah in front of them. The final woe that Jesus brings up is in verse 52. And again, he addresses it to the lawyers, but really it applies to all of the leaders, the Pharisees and the scribes as well. It says they have taken away the key of knowledge. And the key of knowledge, of course, is the scriptures. And we've talked about how they've diluted the scriptures with their own rules and regulations. Their role was supposed to be to help the people understand the scriptures, but in effect, they cut the people off from the scriptures. All of these rules and secret meanings and complex interpretations really made it incomprehensible for the ordinary man. The lawyers love to sit around discussing and arguing about minute details and interpretations. They loved all the mystique that surrounded them and their knowledge. They loved the applause and the adulation of the people. They loved their power and their reputation, but they had neglected their duty to make God known to the people. Not only have they precluded the people from understanding the scriptures, they've turned away from it themselves. Verse 52 says, you did not enter yourselves. So not only have they turned the people away, but they're not going in themselves. The Old Testament scriptures pointed to Christ. And we've seen the last few weeks how the Pharisees rejected their Messiah. And here again, this is another demonstration of that. They're not able to understand the scriptures. All their rules and interpretations are hiding the glorious truth that God is sending a Redeemer to save mankind. When Jesus gives the 7 woes in Matthew, he bluntly says to the Pharisees, you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. Pretty strong condemnation of them. So one of the common threads through all these woes is it's pointing out the hypocrisy of the Pharisees and the scribes and the lawyers. They're trying to maintain these outward appearances, but their hearts are unclean. Their hearts are far from God. They lay expectations on the people that they themselves don't keep because they've written all these loopholes into the law. They love the perks of leadership, but they fail at all the responsibilities.
It's religion. Generally,
It's religion generally, yeah.
religion.
Yeah,
That's all there is.
yeah. Well, then finally, as we wrap up this section, we see that the Pharisees have a response. So Jesus is done speaking, and our nice little luncheon has come to an end, and he gets up and he leaves, and they get up and they follow him out the door. And they've got more questions. They want to hear more from him. But, of course, they're not asking him questions because they want to learn or they want clarification. They're looking for a way to trap him. They want him to say enough that they can use his own words and catch him in the words that he says. Verse 53 says that they began to press him hard. That's in the ESV. The King James Version says they began to urge him vehemently. So they're very hostile toward Jesus after hearing these woes that he's proclaimed to him. That word there, urge or press, the Greek word that's translated urge or press literally means to be held within. Okay, so the idea here is they're holding a grudge. They're holding a grudge against Jesus, and they're not going to let go of it. And it's very strong. He uses the word vehement, so it's a very strong grudge that they're holding against him. Throughout these woes, Jesus has exposed their hypocrisy and the depths of their sin, and they're enraged by it. They're lying in wait. They want to trap him. They want to get back at him. They want to kill the messenger. Jesus' words were strong and direct, but they're also merciful. There's not immediate condemnation. Or immediate judgment. He's holding out an opportunity to them. He's pointing out their sin, but not proclaiming judgment. When they were confronted, they should have repented. Instead of repenting, they harbor a grudge and they seek a way to kill him. So as we've seen a number of times, Jesus has given a lot of evidence that he is the Messiah, And even here in delivering these woes, he's once again fulfilling a messianic prophecy. And let's all turn and read this together in Isaiah 58. We'll see the prophecy that Jesus fulfills here in delivering these woes to the people. So Isaiah 58. And this whole chapter is good, but we'll just read the first 7 verses. Again, part of Isaiah's prophecy about the Messiah. Cry aloud, do not hold back. And that's exactly what Jesus is doing here. He's not holding back, right? Cry aloud, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their transgression, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the judgment of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. Why have we fasted and you see it not? Why have we humbled ourselves and you take no knowledge of it? Behold, in the day of your fast, you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with a wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice to be heard on high. It is such the fast that I choose, a day for a person to humble himself. Is it to bow down his head like a reed and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Will you call this a fast and a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and to bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh. So Jesus boldly proclaimed the sins of these leaders, and indeed was telling them, like these last verses say, that they should be caring for the people, loving the oppressed. So, as we wrap up, a couple of questions. As always, what do we see about God in this passage in Luke?
He's more concerned with the inside than the outside.
Yeah.
He's right on with everything. And just brings up false religion and rules and all which fail.
Yeah,
But he never fails.
yeah.
And this is just religion.
Yeah.
He's so patient to teach us and so patient to keep teaching us over and over and over.
Yeah, these weren't new lessons that he's sharing with them, were they? Yeah.
These are like, I think, universal. I mean, you go anywhere around the planet, any culture or civilization at any time, and they wrestle with the same kinds of people and leadership and hypocrisy and burdensome, and it's so timeless because human nature is timeless. But that's just the thing about God, that He is trying to point out these things time and time again, but our sinful nature is the way it is. So what are we going to do? I mean, God has to intervene. It's not like this is particular to the Jewish people. We can talk about it 2,000 years later and say, Or you can go to some other place on the planet and they say, yeah, people are like that, and God is universal. Sin is universal.
Yeah.
And yet what God has to offer is so much better. It's pretty simple. I mean,
Well, yeah, sometimes people want to try everything else first, right? They want to exhaust their own resources before turning to God.
World religions and decide.
Yeah.
It's just, and people say, I heard this one person say, everybody's heard the gospel. They haven't.
No.
They haven't. That's our job.
Well, the guy you met in the gym today, he hadn't heard it.
Yeah, he didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't, even people in churches.
Yeah.
So that's does that make me a cop?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, then a couple takeaway questions. We're over time, so we won't spend a lot of time here, but something for you to consider this week. In what ways do I need to focus more on heart issues and less on external appearances? And you can have your own answers for that. And then finally, how can I be less concerned with the details of service and more concerned with love, justice, and mercy toward others? Now, the idea I'm trying to get at here is, while we are doing good things, we are doing ministry, we're serving in the church, sometimes we get sidetracked by some of the minutiae of that and some of the details of that, and we forget the reason we're doing it, right? The reason we're doing it is to extend love and mercy toward others. And I think it's good that, especially when we are involved, we are active, that's a good thing. But let's pause along the way too to remember, that's not the end, right? The end is I want to show God's love and justice and mercy to others through my service.